was needed to be able to coordinate, thousands and thousands of pieces of medical equipment across multiple projects. And so, and it was also the time when I started really developing BIM skills, family building, and really understanding the power of data within BIM. And because of the project load that I had, I developed a lot of automation tools using BIM and Revit, learning a lot about data. And so it was at that time, still not having any prospects of design jobs, I decided to go back for my master's in business analytics. I always wanted to do something a little bit different than just focus purely on design, because I felt, for me personally, the design profession wasn't enough of an intellectual challenge. And so I needed to do something slightly different. And so that propelled me to go for my master's in business analytics. And then I went from just sort of being a BIM coordinator to a BIM manager. And then when I finished my degree, I ended up going and working for the design technology group at CRTKL. So I'd still been working at CRTKL, just in different capacities. And then eventually I led the design technology team, which included, all the stuff that I was doing in BIM, user experience design, computational design. I led that group just for a hot minute, but then went and focused and developed my own group, which was specifically focused on data analytics and engineering, which is where I spent the last 3 years of my career prior to February when I was laid off. And so even then, I knew that I didn't want to keep trying to do the kind of work that I really loved, which was around data analytics and around information around buildings, to be able to really harness the sort of I in BIM, to really make use of that for improving construction and efficiency, was just not capable. And so I started my own company, and now my specialty is I do a lot of BIM consulting. That can be anything from developing content standards, or doing model coordination, just hopping in and doing that work. But I also do a lot of other, again, user experience stuff, which we'll talk about a project in a minute. But I'd say my real passion is around sort of the data side of things and really the scientific aspects of building technologies. And so that was kind of the trajectory, from, I think, the financial crisis and all the sort of things that I ran into in the industry as being a sort of young designer really helped, focus my interests and my talents around a very core set of, data and BIM are really highly aligned, at least in the work that we do. And so a big part of my focus is around that, and a lot of my passion for that.
Yeah, and I want to understand a little bit more about, like you said, the I in BIM, because
Hmm.
obviously you have an interest in analytics. Can you
Yeah.
just share with us maybe a couple of use cases or projects that you worked on where analytics were a key part of that project, and how are they used to help benefit and move the project forward?
Sure. So a lot of the projects that I worked in healthcare had, healthcare has a lot of expectations, right? Hospitals are extremely complex. In a planning stage, certain clients, whether they be government or entities like in Canada, could even be domestic projects here in the U.S. For like the VA, they have very specific requirements, and designers are not always extremely well versed in using data. So they look at spreadsheets, or they'll print literally a spreadsheet off or use a PDF of a spreadsheet and highlight it, when they could just pull that information out of a model. There's all these tools that can be used from these projects to be able to, if you put the data in and you build it in a right way, you don't need to print out a piece of paper and use a marker, right? You can have the system do that for you. And so I worked on a lot of projects like that, that I developed ways of pulling information from external databases, pulling information from the Revit model, automating data extraction, pulling those into a dashboard, and to be able to present that in a way to either the clients or our internal stakeholders to be able to review that content. I can think of so many different use cases. I wish I could show you all of them, but they're really, really fascinating work. I wish it could have gotten more traction, but yeah.
Yeah, and since 2008 until now, have you
Mhm.
seen how data is integrated into these projects change? I mean, was BIM or the I in BIM, was it always or as important back in the day, or is it people didn't realize how to integrate it, or was
Still don't think a lot of people fully comprehend what the capabilities are because most of the time I see BIM, it's kind of treated like CAD. They treat it as sort of a
yeah,
drafting software. I think you'll see some cases where they are. I think when people use a lot of tools like anything with computational design, I think there is an aspect of that, but I still think there's a lot missing and a lot that's still. I still think there's tons of potential and a lot of opportunities that could be seized upon. And when I work with my clients, I think they're always surprised. I think the problem with data and information is that it's so abstract that it's not something that you can touch, right? I mean, I think as designers, the default is to see a picture, to see something. But the second you start to get information, it becomes so abstract as to almost not exist at all, which for me is one of the main reasons why I called my company Unformed, right? Because space isn't something that you can touch, it's something that you experience. And a lot like data, it doesn't exist in the tangible sense, right? But it is the very thing that creates all those other things that we consume or that we experience. And so that was really the inspiration for the company. And so I think that there's still a lot of opportunity for that. And I think it does require putting some things in place to make it accessible for people to do. I hope that more people start to realize that the potential, because it really can save them time and headache, right? Like let these systems do the heavy work for you and not try to reinvent the wheel constantly, or to try to brute force work when you can let data and sort of these systems really work for you. It can be a challenge, though. I understand, because again, some of it become abstract, and knowing how to do some of these things is not sort of second nature to people. But that's why I'm a nerd and want to be mad scientist. So that's perfect alley for me to go after.
yeah,
So
and you're kind of on both sides of the coin, or
yeah,
meaning you do the analytics, and then you also have capabilities to do design as well.
correct.
And one of the projects that you were sharing with me, before we went live is, I believe it was in the healthcare space. Can you share
Yeah,
maybe a little bit more about that
yeah,
project and kind of,
sure. Would you like to see it?
yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So just to give our listeners some background here, this client. They develop a product, right? So they're a independent manufacturer. They're called Walters Healthcare Resources. They developed this product called INDAT, right? They call it a raceway. It's this sort of channel system that acts as a sort of chassis for all the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing services that go to an operating room. So a lot of operating rooms are, traditional ones are stick built, and when renovations happen, it's costly, and it's also costly to run all these services independently. So this product really allows clients to offer maximum flexibility in their spaces. And so essentially you've got maybe three major systems here. You've got your internal, which is your mechanical devices, which supply air, your raceway, which supply gases and electrical, and then you have your exterior lighting. And then, of course, the booms and lights are meant to go inside of it. But, being able to trying to explain this to a client or a potential customer can be daunting when you're just kind of saying the words instead of actually showing what the capabilities are. And to be able to describe how this looks in a space is something that's kind of challenging to do. But the story behind this is originally they were in CAD, and they were getting projects that were in Revit. This process started in 2017. So I've been freelancing for this client for going on really pretty close to a decade now. And so before this was just a recent product. All this stuff was built in Revit, right? So we had to build BIM objects, and they needed to do fabrication, insight model coordination, using Navisworks. And so being able to build these products, because literally every parts of this model needed to be identified in some capacity, whether that's a detail.
Mm.
And so instead of reinventing the wheel, when it came to producing this AR concept, I decided to use the BIM content. But the problem was translating that geometry into something that's usable for augmented reality was not easy, and it didn't work. I tried multiple times. I tried multiple plugins, and none of them bound the materials. So I had to create a workflow to go from Revit to essentially this is in Swift XR. There's tons of other products out there. I just found this one to be the easiest at the time. I also tried Model Viewer, but I didn't really want to end up customizing an entire user interface for this exercise. So
Right.
I went with a sort of standalone app. But yeah, all these, I mean, this system is multiple products or multiple BIM components, all integrated. I mean, if I were to break this system down, I open this family contains multiple other families, and the
Wow.
rabbit hole continues. So, but like I said, getting this into Swift was not a direct path. So ended up having to bring it into Blender was my preferred route. That allowed me to modify the materials. Even though I mapped materials in Revit, they did not translate. Some of the sockets of the materials did, like it provided like a slot, but ultimately I ended up having to map materials to geometry, add lighting, and do all kinds of stuff. And it took me probably, I mean, I'm being generous. On the low end, 50 tries, probably closer to 100 and several hours. Now, I didn't build a client for that work because I think a lot of that was experimental. But it took me a long time to understand. I mean, I'm not a Blender guy. I mean, I've sunk a decade of my career into Revit, so which I encourage people to learn other software. And so I decided to use Blender, which I'm really happy I did. But it's its own universe in itself. So yeah, ended up having to move all that to Blender, and then move that into Swift using the GLB format. So this, I think FBX format
Uh-huh.
is the format that I used. Is that FBX?
Uh-huh.
Yes, FBX. That was the best format that I found in terms of not destroying the geometry and still allowing me to be able to customize the materials. I tried all their formats, none of them compared to that. If anybody else has better options, I'll be happy to hear it. But that's what I use. And then I had to materials were interesting challenge in Blender because the procedural materials do not work in GLB format when you're
Mm.
trying to render.
Hmm.
So you have to use texture-based materials.
Right.
So again, learning a whole lot there as well. But it was great, and I also learned a lot about lighting effects and how materials work, which I completely took for granted using this. So using Revit all the time. So
Yeah. Right. And so, kind of tons of questions breaking down this workflow. So,
sure.
obviously, you're an expert in Revit. What was it like, or how did you go about learning Blender? So, you started with a model that you had completed in Revit, and then you have an AR project. So we got to get to Blender. How did you go about, or what was it like learning Blender?
Challenging because when you open Blender, it's like tons of different things that I have no clue about. So I think honestly, the hardest part was just getting over the fear of jumping in, and then narrowing my focus to just the environments that I needed. So again, like I said, tons of failure. But I think when I was going through it, I was spending a lot of time, and I'm like, why am I tiptoeing around this? I was like, remember, fail fast. So, and I mean, that was really the concept. It's like really test it out. If it fails, just try it again, try it again, try it again, try it again, try it again. And eventually I started understanding, and YouTube, I think, helped the most. So
Yeah.
the YouTube and my own personal failure were my best teachers. So yeah. And then once just kind of struggling through the models and understanding the different file formats, how they imported, and once I started getting past like trying to make it perfect and just trying to launch it right into like a viewer, when I was realizing, okay, well, this didn't work, then I realized I started learning a lot faster. And so it made it a lot easier after a while. But it did take a long time to get through the initial, part of it. But then, I mean, now it's pretty easy. I mean, ultimately, it came out to be a lot easier than I thought it was at first. It can be overwhelming when you're not used to some of the user interface. But ultimately, it's not as complicated as I thought it was. But there's so many good resources online that really help. So, and that was one of the other reasons why I chose Blenders because there are so many open source resources.
Do you see any resistance or is there an opinion among engineers? Oh, okay, Blender's kind of more for games or animation. Why should we use it? Or is it kind of accepted by engineers? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I wouldn't use Blender for anything that I would need to do for production. I think for like anything like fabrication wise, just because it doesn't have the tools needed to like any of the authoring tools that you would need to produce like say drawings or I'm not sure it really has anything that you can do with like a CNC machine or anything like that. And I don't think that it has. And that's the thing. I don't know some of that stuff. I wouldn't use that for that things. Now I would use it as an interchange format, like a thing to do renderings and that sort of thing, materials and that sort of stuff. But I'm not sure I would use it to. Now, what you could use it for that I think something like Revit doesn't have the capability for would be to do complex geometry that you just simply can't model in Revit. Now, you could bring that into Revit and use it, but I don't know if I would use this system for production, but I would use it for modeling complex geometry that if I needed to use it into Revit that I couldn't produce in there, I wouldn't say why I wouldn't do it. But I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. Is I don't think I would risk doing it and not having that kind of experience. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and going back to what you're sharing currently on your screen, so just to kind of make sure that we fully understand the use case here. So
sure,
we have this customer that you've been working with for quite some time, and then they
yeah.
are now in the process where they're selling this device to specific hospitals. And are they then walking into the hospital with their mobile phone and then holding it up, and then it appears in the room, or what
Yeah.
are or
Yeah, I
what
mean,
are
you could do it in a conference room. Like I could do it in the conference room that I'm in right now. That's the beauty of it is that you can take it anywhere. So if you're meeting your client, like we did it in the on the showroom floor down in Austin in a huge space. It was great. So that you could have somebody walk by your booth and then you can show this to them without having to be there. You can send them a link and they could show it. They can interact with it in their space. Or you could be in the hospital in an operating room and show them what a future might look like for that product. So that's what I think is really great about this. Which I mean, I love VR experiences. I think they're great, but I do think that having AR is great as well because it doesn't require you to have any hardware other than your phone, and it's extremely portable. And I think for them, this is a really great opportunity to do that.
And I saw that you opted to go for a delivery or a browser-based delivery method, meaning you've created, or SwiftXR, and they also have the AR option, but they also have, a browser option, which we can see right here. Was
Yeah.
there any reason for picking something that you could share in a browser versus, I don't know, sending them a GLB file that they could download and try to view on a device? Is there a reason for including browser at
I
all?
think we wanted to have the maximum capability in terms of what the user might be capable of doing. And they also wanted to be able to show this maybe in a browser to be able to show like on a screen. But there is this option to view in a space. So like this is just from the browser. So if somebody's on their computer, they can open their phone. Now, when you deliver this on the phone, it just opens the app and it gives you the single click button to view in space. Now there is another option that I think would have been great to be able to. I'm trying to think of how that would work. I know, like you said, there's other options, and I might try that on another maybe another time. But there hasn't really been any ask for that. But
And did you ever run into the challenge of having to update the model based
yeah.
on a design change, but you already
Mhm.
have it in Blender? Was that the situation for you at all ever?
Oh yeah, this happened 3 times actually since I produced this back in September. Yeah.
Uh, any tips or ideas on how to manage this in a workflow where you have a model in Revit that's been updated, and how
Hmm.
and how
Great
you're
question.
how you're approaching that in Blender? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main thing, and this is kind of a two-part thing. So I think in Revit, keeping your files, your versions and well order is very important. But then also making sure you have a Blender file that you trust. So like whatever version for you Blender file, and then when you can break. So this system, I don't think I have Blender on this computer. But essentially in Blender, I broke this since, essentially each one of these is a GLB file, right? So the way that I did this in Blender is that I had to basically group these different parts into Blender Because if I wanted to, let's say, like, for instance, they wanted to swap out this lighting option on the perimeter, right? Let's see if I can zoom in. I don't have my mouse, unfortunately. It's a newbie mistake. They wanted to swap out this lighting option. Um, and because at first I didn't know which one they wanted to do, and then they wanted to change the order. But because I had thought of this ahead of time, I was like, okay, I need to quarantine these into their own little groups so I can swap them out. Because what I did was in Revit, I exported the new geometry and just integrated with the old ones. Now Blender, every time this, even the same material, it did duplicate it, but all I had to do was go into Blender, select the geometry, and then go and just swap the material, and it just happened automatically. So making sure that there was a common origin in Revit. So what I had done is actually, it's not this model. I had actually created a sort of mirror model in Revit that had everything in the position that I wanted it to be in Blender. So that way, if I only wanted to export one item, it would go and default to the same position that it would be in Blender.
Cool.
So you kind of got to think at both ends of where your the beginning and the end are, so that way you can translate the geometry and then also be ready to sort of separate the geometry into its individual parts so you can have it. That kind of evolved over time. I didn't even think about that until towards the end, and then that made it a lot easier. But because I had put it all in sort of one bucket in Revit and I had everything consistent, I just swapped out the different pieces. So I guess to bring that down to something simple is just think about how it's going to end up and try to build that into the beginning so that your geometry will end up where you want it to go. That way you can swap different parts of it out. And the more you can modularize the system, I think is really, really important. Because otherwise you won't, you'll end up, creating just like a big behemoth, and then you have to basically recreate the whole thing. Like this thing is built up into multiple parts, which make, I can get granular with it, is what I'm saying, right? I can get to a high level of granularity, but I think having consistent material names and consistent breakdowns are really important. It makes, organization is really important.
Yeah, and this may be a dumb question, but I'll ask it anyways. When you were modularizing it, were you exporting a single FBX, or were you then exporting multiple FBXs based on each module? Or
No, and that kind of, I think we had talked about that before the call. I did realize there was a couple of things that weren't working very well because of how, Revit treats essentially some of these as solid objects, even though they're, component families. But that's why I basically built a family that I brought it in the parts that I wanted it to be broken down to into Blender. Instead of just having one solid family, like, that was everything. It's like one family of different groups brought together. So I think the one family that I ended up exporting was like for each part of it. It was like the raceway, the separate series of diffusers, the light ring, and then the upper part, because those are the big chunks that I wanted. So it was one FBX file that had sort of from a family that was the collection of like 7 or 8 different subfamilies. And that was really what allowed me to do it. And that's how I got into it. But I didn't go and create FBX for every single part. I only did it at the sort of aggregated scale that I wanted to be able to manipulate in Blender.
got it.
That's good. Yeah.
Nice. So you're kind of, the master of this workflow now. Have you ever
Yeah.
considered tinkering with Twinmotion or Unreal Engine
Yeah.
or?
I tried Twinmotion, but then when I opened up Unreal, I kind of got scared and I was like, I don't know. I had to
Yeah,
pick a path, and I was like, um, in Unreal with Revit, like there was some stuff that I just ran into and I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. It's probably a lot easier than I thought it was, but I saw a path that I felt like I could get to the finish line, and so I took it. I do want to try using Twinmotion and Unreal, because I do want to do some virtual reality, and I also want to be able to have I want to be able to help other clients that have different workflows that are not this one. I had full sort of control over this, but I know for some of my architectural clients, going Unreal is going to be probably the better path forward versus this one, which was, it's more product based and less experience based, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's less on sort of the space than it is the sort of product and the object
y-
on this one.
yeah. And for the virtual reality use cases, what do you, or have your clients asked you for to do certain things, or what do you imagine using virtual reality for, and what you do?
I think that for some of my clients who are trying to sell some products or have some experience that are not sort of the traditional like PowerPoint and just rendering, I think that would be ideal. But I haven't had any requests for it, but I do think that it might get to that point at some point in time. I also think that it would be good as a good marketing tool for some of them to sort of gamify some of their projects to put like on the web to be able to have some of them interact with it. I don't see that enough, if at all, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity for clients to be able to, or for I say clients, I think architects and designers to be able to share their work, being able to create like let your clients not only just see what you've done but experience what you've done. I think that could just be so cool. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that is sometimes the leap, or when we see our customers make that leap where they already have the BIM model, and it's
yeah,
just really just a matter of now importing it into an Unreal Engine project, and then you basically can gamify it as much as you want,
yeah.
and we like to see that transition and how they begin to use it for visualization. Collaboration is a big one, and then also for of course marketing purposes. And I know that we're already kind of running up on our time together. Is there any other projects or anything else on your mind that you'd like to share about, your time in the industry and some of the challenges you see with navigating these workflows?
Hmm. I don't know. I mean, I think if you haven't listened to any special questions, I have some other content, but it's it's kind of hard to, I mean, there's stuff on my website that I think is, I mean, unless anybody has any questions and want to interrupt, I'm happy to be interrupted. Um, there's some screenshots of some of the work here. I think I mentioned before about, this one was pretty cool. We were able to export sort of model geometry and integrate that into Power BI, and, also pair the data with this project. For me, this was I think one of the better use cases of being able to integrate a BIM model with something that you can actually experience. Especially hospitals can be very complex. There's a lot of different departments. There's a lot of content that's within them, and this project had a lot of requirements, right? And so I think this was a really cool way of being able to translate something that, like, when you think about the eye and BIM and data, becomes so esoteric. But then when you put I feel like when you put something like this around, it's becomes something much more tangible, and you see the capabilities that are available to you. And this was the rendering that I did for that product, for that one client.
Nice.
That was another thing. We used Inkscape for this. That was another
Okay.
ask. They redid their brochure, and so they wanted some custom renderings. And I was like, yeah, let's do it, because this whole new light ring is just a new product that they launched, and they wanted to be able to show it. And they didn't. We wanted to create some. So I created actually my own boom system. So I was like, I want to do something really cool. I want to do something more unique for the industry. So
Cool. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it's a really amazing design. And thank you, Sean, so much for taking the time
yeah,
to sit with us and share a little bit about what you've got going on.
totally.
Is there a way for people to contact you in case they have any questions or they may have a project?
Yeah, 100%. You can go to my website, or you can email me at sean@unformed.org. And yeah, please reach out if you want. Happy to share my experience. I think I actually wrote a small blog post on my website that kind of went through a little bit of the journey that I did in doing this use case that we just talked about. But if you have any other questions or tips or want to share your experience, yeah, happy to hear about it.
Excellent. Sean, thank you so much again for stopping by, and thank you to everyone watching. This has been Real Time Talk with Eagle 3D Streaming. I'm Quentin Anderson, and we will catch you all on the next show. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.